Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning. We have the pleasure of having one of our partners with us, StockIQ. Jeffrey Porter will be presenting on essential elements of inventory planning. And as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and we will post it to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And we do encourage you to ask questions during our presentation. So please feel free to type them in the questions box and we will answer them at the end of our session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey to kick off our presentation.
Thank you, Angie. I appreciate that introduction and welcome on board here today to today's session. As Angie mentioned, we're going to be talking about the essential elements of inventory planning. To get started, I'd like to share a little bit around StockIQ Technologies. As Angie had mentioned, we are partners with them. We're also going to the demonstration of the core functionality and dashboards inside of StockIQ, and there will be time at the end of the session for Q&A. So throw those Q&As over, and as we're going throughout the presentation, collect those, and then we'll answer those at the end. My name is Jeffrey Porter, as Angie noted. I am the Chief Marketing Officer. Technically, I am the Chief Evangelist for StockIQ Technologies. I have been in the industry for 30 plus years in software consulting and leadership. I have deep experience in supply chain with my 23 plus years in the software. Plus, I was in industry directly in manufacturing and managed the technologies that were utilized in one of our manufacturing divisions. We were managing close to $100 million in inventory. So that's really where I cut my teeth on planning. I'm passionate about serving others, and I'm an enthusiast of hiking, cycling, skiing, anything in the outdoors, as well as you can see fishing. So StockIQ Technologies, we provide and we build an intelligent supply chain planning suite. It's been designed, we've got over 65 years in the industry, the leadership here at StockIQ. The core functionality that we're delivering within the supply chain suite is demand planning or forecasting. Replenishment planning might be in the form of purchase orders, transfer orders, work orders, manufacturing orders. Supplier planning, monitoring our vendors' performance. Are they delivering on time? Are they delivering completely? And calculating the lead times of their actual performance. Inventory planning. Think about establishing the correct inventory buffer, meaning how much do I need to carry on a specific item to meet my specific goal? So we will identify that proper inventory level for each and every SKU for your entire network. Capacity planning for our manufacturers and or our distributors who are using external capacity from vendors. We have the ability to monitor the capacity that's available against the requirements and do balancing around that. So as I mentioned, I know historically this has typically been associated with somebody that has internal capacity constraints, but we use it very effectively as well for our distributors who have close relationships with the vendors. Our application has been designed with ease of use, ease of adoption, and ease of adaptation. Ease of use, I'm going to leave that up to you as we go through the overall application. Adoption is focused in on getting the application up and running quickly. And then adaptation is all about saying when we have changes within our supply chain, how quickly can we as a company pivot to meet these new requirements in the marketplace? We talked about adoption. We offer a 28-day promise for an installation of StockIQ. And this is from the time that we get data in from Business Central, engaging with the users, we'll configure the application, go through testing and validation, and move into production. We focus very heavily on this 28 days from the standpoint that we oftentimes find this is the most successful projects when people can move through expediently and get to see and begin using the overall application. We're also going to be talking a little bit about leveling up your ERP. So when we talk about leveling up your ERP, what we're really talking about in here is we're talking about StockIQ as an application and what it can do to enhance Business Central. So there are things certainly in Business Central that have some very good capabilities. StockIQ goes beyond that. And when we talk about leveling up, we're going to be talking about some of these things from a demand planning perspective and forecasting, inventory optimization, ABC classification, inventory replenishment, and then supplier performance management. So without further ado, let's just get directly into the application and we'll start talking about these. So from an overall orientation perspective, this is the StockIQ application suite. As we talked about the various applications that are available, we had noted the inventory sections. We talked about forecasting or demand planning. We talked about purchasing, and we talked about supply management. So just as a bit of an orientation, typically when we begin working with our clients, we advise and give suggestions on the day in the life of somebody that's doing planning. We typically recommend that these individuals start by reviewing alerts. StockIQ generates a series of alerts to identify to the planners and the individuals within the company what needs their attention. These are organized in various categories. So for instance, purchasing related alerts or planning alerts. For instance, identifying where I might have projected stockouts or issues with not the ideal inventory. Maybe it's I'm getting lower, maybe I'm projected to stock out. Maybe it's just a warning. That warning might come in the form of, hey, we're not quite there yet, but just need to let you know that we're getting low, and or other information like when we're building excess, for instance. So from a day in the life of a planner, we like starting off with, hey, what needs my attention today? You will notice in here that we are starting off with 259 various alerts. Now we can filter in on these, and I filter in on the high priority. But furthermore, we can come down here and we can filter, for instance, by AA-based items. Let's look at our high priorities. Other things that I can do on these, I can organize them by my stocking locations, so I have a better idea of where those are at. I can furthermore going into, well, what are those that are projected to be out of stock? So very quickly, I have the ability to take this massive list of potential issues and zero in directly on them. It helps me with my planning. So again, StockIQ is going to be evaluating all of your plans for every single SKU. It might be tens of thousands or thousands, but these alerts are really set up to identify and pinpoint where action is needed. When we get to this information, then the planner has the ability to research them. So for instance, on this particular item, I may need to look at the order schedule, which is the MRP plan for this item, and identify what's going on with it. And if you look over here to the right, one of the things to note is we have inventory in negative situations. So this is telling me that next week, it looks like I'm going to be out of stock as it relates to what my forecasted demand is. So the planner can make decisions around what they need to do with this. For instance, I see that there's product on order out here. What I might do is if I were to move that and get that order in here one week earlier, let's see if it resolves the situation. And lo and behold, if I can do that, get that expedited, I now have the ability to avert a potential stocked out situation. So as we're talking about the day in the life of a planner, this is typically where we recommend the individuals start. The next step in the process is reviewing all of the orders that need to be placed for the day. So when we talk about all the orders that need to be placed for the day, StockIQ is going to generate a list, and we're going to generate a list based on the type of actions that we need to take. So for instance, maybe I need to launch some work orders, manufacturing orders out in here. These are the two vendors that I have set up. Maybe it's ordering products. So maybe it's that purchase to stock. It might be component materials. It might be finished goods. And lastly, if I have a series of warehouses where I'm initiating transfers, this might be my responsibility. So in this overall process, the individual would select the vendor that they need to review. We're providing some information for them, projected stockouts, where am I below my ideal inventory position. We're then presenting a list of individual SKUs that need to be purchased. So this master list out in here is a list of SKUs that need to be purchased. You will notice there's various facts associated with these inventories. So for instance, I see my planning lead time, my ABC class, ultimately the order quantity. These order quantities have already been modified to account for my vendor minimums and multiples and all those other factors. So the vendor has the ability to go through and review this order. They can look at the overall total cost for the order. They have the ability to look at how many quantities are being sold or being ordered. They also have the ability to look at the number of line items that are on there. I would tell you there's other things, though, that we suggest that people look at. So, for instance, maybe I need to understand how many days of supply I am ordering with each one of these orders. So, when I bring this information into the equation, I all of a sudden have some more perspective on what that 100 units means. For instance, I now know that I'm bringing in close to over 3 months of supply. Bottom line is we're presenting information that assists the planner in quickly evaluating what's going on within this order. We furthermore provide the ability to optimize that order. Maybe I need to top off to reach the nearest container. Maybe there's price breaks or other things that are also available in there. So they can invoke an order wizard. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what StockIQ is doing is it's giving these recommendations. A planner has the ability to review them. We're providing some checklists to ensure that they're complying to minimums, multiples, that we're not generating excess inventories. We also have the ability then to move into that next step and decide whether we want to automatically approve them or put them into a review state. If I'm automatically approving them, you can see we've generated 2 orders, each for different locations. Next step in the process is we would put notes on the headers, and we publish these directly into Business Central. From an overall flow perspective, Business Central now becomes the owner of this. Business Central would transmit this to the vendor, and any adjustments or updates that would occur to them. StockIQ is going to retrieve that information, and as we reprocess, recalculate our new safety stock levels, our new requirements plan, it's going to evaluate any of those changes in context of what's going on within that product. So the day in the life of a planner is relatively simple. It's reviewing those alerts. It's then coming back in and beginning to look at what needs replenished in order to maintain my inventory levels. So you might be wondering how this correlates and relates to inventory planning and what we're focused on here. So what I'm going to do is let's go back in and let's talk about the fundamentals and the essentials of inventory planning. What I showed you right here was the end result of those. But let's talk about this from the starting point. And when we talk about inventory, one of the things that we like to talk about is, what does our inventory look like? How does it behave? How important is it to us? So we do this process of classing inventory. When we talk about classing inventory, we're looking typically at 2 or 3 different dimensions. The first dimension is an ABC class. So for instance, in Business Central, you can assign a class a class to an inventory item. You can assign an A, a B, a C, etc. What StockIQ is doing is we're dynamically going out and we're evaluating how that item behaves based on what's important to us as a company. So one of the things to note in here is I have a 2-dimensional matrix. The first one is the A, B, C, and D. And then up at the top, there's another dimension called X, Y, and Z. This is very important when we think about planning for an item. So all of these items that fall in these boxes are all A-based items, but we're also classifying them in respect to, is this recurring demand, meaning, hey, when I forecast it's regularly sold? Is it sporadic in nature? Sporadic might say, I get orders in, but they're infrequent. Doesn't mean that it's low quantities, but it's difficult to forecast. And lastly, Z-based items are slow-based items. Well, when we begin talking about managing these items, one, obviously, an A-based item is one of our high priorities. We want to make sure that we have that in stock most of the time when our customers come to us, and less so as we start going down the criteria. So this grid of information that we're evaluating here is very critical to us as an organization when we think about inventory planning. Couple notes as you're looking at this. The colors on here are not just haphazard, meaning as you look up here in the upper left box, We're really talking about inventory in here that's really important to us. We sell it a lot. It's pretty easy to predict, etc., what the sales are going to be. We then run into this band down in here, which is a little bit more difficult, meaning some C-based items and Bs, but they're a little bit more challenging to manage just from the standpoint of their overall behavior. And then lastly, you'll notice a whole lot of red boxes down in here. These are items that aren't really meeting the high criteria that we are evaluating in an organization, and or they might be really difficult to plan. So we need to begin thinking about, one, do they need to be part of our SKU selection, and or how are we going to manage them when we bring them in? So if you've ever heard the concept of a SKU rationalization, this is all about deciding which items I'm going to be carrying as an organization. And this helps us do that. And how we go about doing that, I'm going to share with you a few of the details, is we evaluate these in context of their behavior. So for instance, on these are all A-based items, and they're all recurring, meaning they're forecastable. We typically see some volume on them. So if I were to look at one of these particular items out in here, you'll note there's just one customer associated with it. But if we look at the forecast chart on this particular item, fair bit of volume on it. It looks like it's up and to the right. So we see that demand going up and to the right. By the way, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what this means and how we predict and how we look at these items. But just note, it's like, hey, this item looks like it's somewhat predictable up and to the right, and it doesn't look like a lot of variation or anything else around it. That's the characteristic of an A-based item with X. You'll also notice that we're monitoring other things, like how many units have we sold of these items? How many orders have we processed? What's the revenue that's been generated? So there are various aspects around these items that help us class. So let's talk about that and the importance of this. So I'm going to go into an area of the application that we call the administration and the configuration. So when we work with our clients, one of the things that we do is we identify how we want to begin that first most important step of classifying inventory. And there's a couple different ways that we can do it based on who you are as an organization and how you want to evaluate. First off is to take a look at classing. We work with a lot of clients that are in multiple distribution facilities or manufacturing facilities. Maybe the products that we're building or selling in one location are very different than another. So maybe it's important for us to evaluate each of those in each respective site. Maybe it's a bill of material position inside of there as well. I need to class my finished goods, the second level, third level, very, very differently. Or maybe it's getting into how I organize my products within my organization. We call these hierarchies in a forecast, meaning if I begin thinking about all my SKUs that I'm carrying, if I roll them up, I can class them into different groupings of products. It's very conducive to us helping one manage them, but also enabling what we call an S&OP or sales and operations planning process. So a lot of different ways that we can think about looking at these cross sections of items. The other thing that we're doing in here is we're automating the ABC. So in lieu of a scenario where you have to go in and set the classing and you have to do it manually, what StockIQ is doing is saying, hey, all of that information that we looked at over here, like how many orders did we receive, what were the quantities sold and the revenue generated, how frequently do you want StockIQ to reevaluate these? So we have the ability to do it and just say, we can do it every day. We can do it every week or month or quarter. So from a leading practice perspective, we typically recommend a reevaluation on a monthly or quarterly basis. So start thinking in terms of what this takes to manually do this if you have thousands of items. Well, StockIQ is going to manage that directly for you. So this is the first dimension that we're looking at when we think about classing inventory. Let's look at the next one though. And the next one in here is when we begin thinking about classing inventory, we're starting to think about things like, okay, what's important to me? Is it how many orders that I get on this item? Is it the revenue generated from that item? Or is it the quantity sold or all of the above? So in this particular case, what we're doing is we're deciding and we're helping our clients come forward and say, what's the big driver for you as an organization? It can be very different. But this is the information. Now, in my particular example, I'm just truly looking at how many times an item gets ordered. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to break these apart. When we talk about breaking them apart, we're really talking about the 80-20 rule. We're looking for those SKUs that make up the top 80% of the orders that we receive, but they might be a fewer percentage of those overall items. This is the breakdown that's going to tell us where it falls into an A, B, C. So for instance, out in here with an 80%, when I evaluate the number of orders, what I am looking for are all those SKUs that make up the top 80% of all orders that come into the organization. We're doing this based on looking at sales order history. So this is one of the dimensions that helps us go in and do the classing. The next thing that we're going to look at is really critical in this inventory planning. So start keeping in mind when we talk about our A, Bs, and Cs, the next thing that we want to do, and this is a real key element for inventory planning, is saying, okay, what is our service goal and objective? So this is a very, very key bit of information for us that's coming out in here, which is, okay, my A-based items are the items that my customers are coming to me for. And in those A-based items, I better make sure that I'm carrying a lot of inventory for those and that I'm not stocking out because it's what people come to us for. On the other hand, I might be in a sporadic nature or a slow inventory, and you can see down in here as it's a C or a D based item, maybe I'm just not willing to invest as much inventory on these items, so I can adjust the service level. Now, what is service level? So service level, think in terms of fill rate. A service level is really a measure of when a customer comes in to purchase product from me, how am I able to fill that? Meaning, do I have that product 98% of the time, 99% of the time, etc. So for instance, when we think about a 99% service level, I can roughly say that I'll be in stock for that item all but once every 2 years. A 98% service level would equate to being out of stock once per year. So this is how we begin thinking about and associating our service objective with the importance of the item that we just evaluated. Again, a really, really important concept that we're introducing in here. All righty. So with that being said, let's now go out and let's take a look at this next step in the essentials of inventory planning. By the way, the first one's been completed. We have these, we've stratified them. We know now if I look at my matrix, whether it's an A, B, C, or a D. The next important item in here gets into forecasting. So forecasting is all about looking at historical sales, looking at promotions, events that have influenced demand, and predicting what we think we're going to be selling. But there's a lot of information that can come from a particular forecast. So when I begin looking at an item, by the way, what I did is I picked up this item at stocking location 271. What I'm doing is I'm evaluating a number of different criteria. And the criteria that I'm evaluating is my sales history. So for instance, on this chart, you will note on the dotted line, this represents today. Everything to the left is history. Everything to the right is a forward-looking forecast. I have 3 years of history and I have 2 years that I'm going to project out. What we're looking at is each month and or week, depending on whether you're in a weekly or a monthly forecast, we're going to go out and we're going to evaluate all of the sales orders that occurred for this particular item. We're going to look at who's purchasing them. We're going to look at the quantity sold. We're also going to do some other measurements in here, which is to say, did we have product on hand when the customer came in to purchase it? And with this particular item, you can see that our lowest on-hand quantity at any point in time during this period was 40 units. The key that we're doing on this is if we're out of stock, we can actually predict and evaluate what our potential losses were from that stock out. But bottom line, we're leveraging this history. One thing to note within this history, you'll see a great big blue bar over here. What this blue bar represents is a note where we have come out and we've said, this is an abnormal order. We want it removed from consideration in the history when we begin evaluating our history. So this is we call this curating history or removing these outliers, meaning, hey, a one-time sale, maybe it's somebody that came in and bought this product, they bought a lot of quantity because their primary vendor was out of it. We'd like to have them as a customer, but we just know that it's not going to happen. So we want to remove it from the history so we're not anticipating those sales into the future. So when we begin evaluating this data, the things that we're looking for is the trending. Is the demand going up? Is it going down? Is it staying flat? And the trending is really helping us understand how the volume is going on this overall product. One of the things to note that we're indicating up here is at the very top, you'll look at forecasted growth, and we're actually predicting a little bit slower growth on this one, in fact, a negative growth trend. You can actually see it when you begin looking at the data. By the way, we focus very heavily on the visuals because a picture can paint 1,000 words. All the data sits behind this, and you can review that and evaluate it. I like the pictures. A lot of people do. Having said that, this is the first element that we're looking for is trending. The second thing that we're looking at in an item is to say, hey, are there seasonal trends? Are there time in the year that this demand for this product is higher than another? Well, there's a lot of peaks and a lot of valleys in it, but let's evaluate this and see what the seasonality exists. So seasonality is really important from the standpoint that I don't want to carry a lot of product when my demand is lower than average, consistently below on an annual basis. Likewise, when my inventory and my demand's higher, I'm going to be carrying more inventory and preparing to carry more inventory. So we've detected out in here, and by the way, there is a really strong correlation, which basically means we can definitely see year over year a really strong association, meaning that seasonal pattern is very distinct. So seasonality is a component that we're looking at. The next thing that we're doing is we're evaluating that history and we're looking for the mathematics that go back and define that data the best. Once we find that best fit, we're going to project it forward. When we're projecting it forward, we're laying that projection over the trend line and we're including seasonality. This right in here is a representation of what we think we're going to be selling out in the future. So from an inventory perspective, especially with long lead time items, it's really important for me to know how much I need at a lead time out into the future. Especially a lot of our clients have very long lead times, 60 days, 90, 120. During the pandemic, they were actually quite longer. But we need to know what my requirements are at this period, not what I'm looking at historically. So for instance, if I'm coming out of an average here, my average is down. If I just look historically and go, hey, my average usage has been X number of units, I'm really looking in the rear view mirror and not forward. We want to be looking forward when we begin doing our planning. So the forecast is really that key foundational element for us to really evaluate what do I think I need in the future. So this is out here in that present. But there's some other things in here that are really critical that we can learn from this data. So if you look back at that red line and you look back in the green, you can see that there's a pretty darn good fit, meaning that it looks like it mimics it pretty closely. One of the things that we're measuring in here is what we call forecast error. Forecast error is a measurement of, I like thinking about it in a positive term, which is our confidence within the forecast. So when I begin thinking about this, I have about a 15% error rate, meaning when I look into the future at the lead time of the product, I'm 95% confident that that demand is going to be 15% above that line or 15% below. So it's going to be someplace within that range. Now, it doesn't mean that it could be less, and it doesn't mean that it couldn't be higher. And so what we want to do now is we want to take this information that we've gleaned and now talk about the inventory planning. So let me actually back up here for just a moment. We talked about that ABC stratification. So now all of a sudden we're bringing that piece of the equation back in. You will notice on this one, this item is an A-based item. Our service level on that for all the A's and the X's we associated at 99%. By the way, it's recurring demand, meaning it's predictable. We have enough history on here that we can do a pretty darn good job of forecasting it into the future. You see the target service level that's been associated. So that's our goal as an organization on how we want to keep this product in stock. So how are we going to do this knowing that every once in a while, 50% of the time, my sales could be above what I've forecasted? Well, this is where the magic comes in, and this is where those essentials of inventory planning come in, which is we're going to look at what our service objective is. We're going to look at the lead time to replenish. We are going to look at that forecast error. And most importantly, we're going to look out into the future. We're going to say, at the lead time, how much inventory do I need in place? And we're going to set a target for that. Now, we're introducing this concept of what we call a safety stock or a buffer stock. This is really extra inventory that we bring in into the organization to cover the fact that that sales might be higher than what we anticipated. In fact, 50% of the time we'd expect, again, the sales to be higher than what we predicted. But the good news is if we know what our goals are, we know what the forecast error is, I can calculate precisely how much inventory I need to carry as a buffer as a minimum. I can also calculate that band of inventory, my max stocking as well. So the ideal inventory position for this item, for this SKU, is between 5 units and 113. If you think about it in working days of supply, between 2 days and 50 days. Anything in between there, we're okay with. By the way, target is essentially going, our target stock is halfway in between those ranges. And then the value of the overall inventory. So we would expect on this item to be carrying roughly about $1,300. Now, one of the things in this overall equation is if we want to meet higher service level goal, or we think this is too much inventory to carry, we can actually come out here and we can say, well, what if we wanted to lower our service objective? So for instance, how to read this graph is on the x-axis, the bar down here, this is my service goal. Over on the y-axis is how much inventory I need to carry at a base level in order to meet that goal. This line right out here represents my forecast error. So with really low forecast error, we can meet really high service objectives with not a lot of inventory. And the converse is true, which is if we have an item that's really hard to predict, in order to meet high service goals, we're going to have to carry more inventory. One thing I'd like to focus on in here is typically what we see with an organization. We typically see an organization carrying a lead times worth, meaning, hey, I need to know, for instance, if my demand is really high, I want to make sure that I've got a full lead time of inventory, meaning if I have a 30-day lead time, I'm going to carry 30 days of my average sales historically, right? That's oftentimes how people begin thinking about this. What we're here to share with you is with some analysis looking back at predictability, we can reduce the amount of inventory that we're carrying and still meet those high service level goals. So this is where we become good stewards of the resources. So those inventories, by the way, on a balance sheet are classified as an asset. Oftentimes, though, it can be quite onerous, meaning uh, our clients will carry 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 million in inventory. And I like to think about it as a liability because once it comes into the organization, there's typically working capital tied up into it. We typically have a line of credit at a bank that's securing that. But most importantly, it's resources that are going into inventory that could be used elsewhere in the business. So our goal and objective out in here is to say, you know what? We know you have goals and objectives. We're going to pull those in, and then we're going to suggest an inventory position to meet that goal based on our forecastability. So again, we've now taken that ABC, how important is the item? We've associated with your goals for that item. We're now analyzing how these particular items behave, and we're precisely telling how much inventory needs to go in place. So all of a sudden now, I have a forecast. I know exactly what this item's service goal is, and I know what my inventory position is. So I am now equipped with a baseline of where my inventory should be sitting. By the way, when we begin looking at these inventory positions, back when we looked at those alerts that were out there, there's this concept that we call below safety stock. Well, anytime my inventory is projected to go below my safety stock, we're going to call that out an alert. We also have another parameter that we call, which gets into a little bit more critical nature, which is when I start consuming that inventory and I'm at about half of my safety stock, I might be really concerned. We can call that a panic point. So in our purchasing, we're going to highlight how many items were in an okay status. We're going to identify any of those below safety stock and below a panic point or projected to stock out. So this is equipping me by precisely knowing where those parameters and where those alerts are. So it's a really key element for us. So we now have a pretty darn good picture for this particular SKU, how much I should carry, where my service goals are. But more importantly, I know that if the behavior of this item changes, we're automatically going to catch that when we go back through our ABC classification. So this is the foundation for this essential inventory planning. But I also need to share with you is I might be selling this item at a different location and the volumes are different and the item's different. So when we begin thinking about stocking, stocking is really important for each stocking location that we come into. So I have this item at another location. It's at location number 9. You can see out in here my inventory is a little bit higher. I'm carrying more inventory for that particular item. And again, if I go out and look at the forecast error is actually a little bit lower, but it looks like our volumes are a little bit higher. So important to classify these items and then set a safety stock level for each of the individual locations that are coming out in there. Alrighty, so we've talked about some of those key elements and how we're going to go about doing that planning. But now let's tie it together and let's go out and let's look at a replenishment. So this is going to equip me in my distribution and in my requirements plan for my purchasing, understanding what I need to order. So let's talk about that. So right now I have 70 units on hand of this particular item. I can go out and see if I have any open orders on hand, which I don't. I don't have any firm customer orders either, right? But what we're going to do in here is we're going to come out and we're going to take the order policy that we're using. By the way, we're using an order point policy on here. An order point policy works really well with recurring items, and its parameters that we're using is a safety stock, a concept of what we call a reorder point. And I'll just touch on this briefly. But one of the things that we're also calculating is the reorder point. This is that number. When our on hand reaches 26, it's time to place another order. So we now know also the trigger upon which and at the time that an order needs to get placed. It's not when we hit our safety stock, it's when we hit our reorder point. Okay. So let's pull all those pieces together and let's begin evaluating them in context of a forecast. And I'm going to look at this item in a daily view, meaning in my MRP plan, I'm going to come out and by day, I'm going to come out and I'm going to say, okay, what was my inventory position that I started with? I'm then going to look at all the demands that are going to be placed on this particular item. If I have any firm sales order that need to fill, if then I have a forecasted demand, and again, you can see these numbers vary. They're not all static. Um, I can consume that amount of inventory. I then add in anything that's scheduled to be received. And by the way, one of the things that StockIQ does exceptionally well is we're helping our clients manage blanket purchase orders. But moving into the next one is planned orders. Then I start identifying, have I reached an order point for this product? And I do that by determining what my projected inventory is. So you can see on my projected inventory is still above my safety stock for this second item that we looked at, which was 11 units. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down into the future. And one of the things that I want you to note is, hey, out here on the 16th of June, there is a number over here in the planned orders column. What it's scheduled is we've hit the reorder point, or we're planning to hit the reorder point at this point, that by the time I order that product, by the time the manufacturer manufactures it, and the shipping to get to me, this is the lead time associated with that item. I'm going to receive that product at that time right before my inventory drops down below the 11 units, right? So remember, we want to keep that inventory buffer in place so that if my orders come in bigger than I anticipated, I still have that inventory. So one of the wonderful things in here in this inventory planning is StockIQ is predicting when we would need to order product. And we do that by looking at my order quantities, my minimums, my multiples, all of those factors. And we're evaluating out into the future when we would be ordering. Now, obviously, looking at this on a daily basis isn't typically how people think about it. But when we're precisely managing our inventory, this is a big deal for us. We need to understand exactly when to order, and it's time for that inventory position. So these are some of the core elements for um, keeping our inventory levels at what we would call the optimal level. They're aligned with our business goals and objectives, and they're also out in here aligned with how the item overall behaves, right? So those are really key elements for us as we begin working at this. Alrighty. So, but the wonderful thing here, in addition to this inventory planning, is there's a whole lot of things that we can do with this information. So for instance, I hit in here on the safety stock, and you can see out in here that I had 11 units. But I also came out here and I said, you know what, if I wanted a lower service objective, I can predict where that is. So let's take this curve then and let's talk about how we can utilize this information for assisting the organization in deciding where to invest. And by the way, there's typically a tension between the sales team, the marketing team, and the operation and the finance team. Operations is out there to execute. Finance wants to minimize the outlay of cash. On the other hand, there's this pull from sales to go, I want high service levels. So there's this tug and pull and decisions that need to be made. So one of the things that we can do is we can help in that by providing what we call a service level analysis. Oftentimes what our clients will do is they will evaluate what they want their overall total spend to be, potentially by ABC class, or it might be by product family as well. And then what StockIQ does is we go out and we say, okay, for these A-based items, for these various service levels, how much inventory do we need to put in place to guarantee that we're making this target? So for instance, as we're going down through here, we're going to look at every single SKU that's in the mix by every single location. And if we look at this, for instance, if I said, hey, you know what, I want a 90% service level on this particular item, I can get away and reach that goal with $243. On the other hand, in order to meet a 99% service level, I'm going to have to boost that base inventory by up to 442. So what this matrix does is it gives the organization equipped with the knowledge of how much would I need to invest to meet a service level goal. So some wonderful offshoots that we have in here. So as we're going through here, one of the things that I want to note is we are getting close to time out here, and I want to open up some questions. But I have a few of the things that I'd like to present to you here around this. So we've talked a lot about this planning. One of the things I'm hope that's clear that's come forward in this is StockIQ is a partner. We focus very heavily on partnering with our clients. We're not just a vendor. We're not just selling software. A lot of us have a lot of industry experience, and we're really passionate about helping people accomplish their goals and objectives. There's a value proposition associated with managing inventory properly. We typically see anywhere from a 10 to 30% reduction in inventory by deploying some of these methodologies in conjunction with Business Central and putting on a powerful planning engine like StockIQ to accomplish inventory reduction. But more importantly, it's an alignment of inventory to our goals and objectives and to how an item behaves. Customer satisfaction, when we carry the proper amounts of inventory, our customers are going to be happier. This one over here is a big deal for us. Oftentimes there's a huge amount of time that individuals spend planning this and setting these parameters. And I would say oftentimes what we find when we begin engaging with clients that have been manually setting these safety stock levels and things, that they oftentimes get set once and we never revisit them, but maybe the behavior of the items change. So it's moved from a slow mover to a high mover. I might not have enough inventory. So through that automation and providing the information to the planner, we typically see an individual's time spent in the planning process reduced by 50 to 70%. What that means is I now have the ability to go off and getting strategic and more proactive in preventing stockouts. Revenue and margin through better product availability. Lastly, StockIQ is 100% committed to your success. We have a number of badges that are proof to this. So for instance, in the summer, you can see that we provide the best support, best meets requirements, easiest to administer the overall application, and best support. We have continued to receive more and more of these badges over time. Essentially, they're an acknowledgement from our clients on how we go out and how we're servicing them. Lastly, in here, what I'd like to do is make an offer that if you'd like to learn a little bit more about this, I would be happy to have a conversation directly with you about your organization, about your planning, about forecasting, and what this might do to help you. We're happy to provide a $50 Amazon gift card just for calling and scheduling a conversation. I'd love to visit with you. I'd love to learn about your business. If you would like and are interested in doing this, you can certainly reach out to me, Jeffrey Porter, at jporter@stockiqtech.com. You can reach me on my personal line, which is 970-481-0040. Judy Vanderlinden is also available, and Judy can be reached at jvanderlinden and this phone number right here. Furthermore, you can go out to the stockiqtech.com for additional information around the StockIQ platform. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open this up to questions at this point, and we're going to see, as we're talking in here. So I see one of the questions that first came over is when you were first introducing the concept of an ABC, you talked about this other dimension, which was the XYZ, but you only talked about X. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's talk about that. And I'll talk about it from the standpoint it's really, really important for a lot of distributors and manufacturers. So what are we talking about when we talk about this X, Y, and Z? What we're talking about is the overall behavior of the item. So I'm going to go back over here to our home screen. I'm going to point something out. One of the things to note over here is we call these things usage patterns. Essentially what it's doing is it's saying we're going to look at each and every item. We're going to identify how many of those are new into the item mix, how many of those are recurring. We talked a lot about recurring, but we're going to talk about sporadic and slow. Sporadic items are essentially items that might have a lot of sales on them, but they're really difficult to forecast. And why do we bring that up? Well, let's go back over here and we're going to look at our stratification detail again. And instead of clicking in on this box with the AX, I'm going to come out here and I'm going to look at some of these items that fall into the Y. So in the Y, essentially what we're doing is we have identified these as sporadic based items. This is a perfect example of a sporadic based item. So you can see the items that come in, we're selling a lot of it, but it doesn't look like it's very consistent. Very different than that graph that we looked at. There's some peaks, there's some valleys, there's months in here where we don't sell anything. And there's periods out in here where we sell a lot. But one of the things to impress on you in here is these types of items are really, really challenging to predict what's going to be happening in the future. Our overall analysis when we begin planning these, and by the way, this can account for 40, 50, 60% of a distributor or a manufacturer's inventory, meaning it behaves like this. So how do we manage an item like this when it's sporadic? In fact, you can see the forecast. I'm not ashamed to tell you that this is really difficult to forecast. So what we're doing is we're having to do our best of kind of looking at average sales. Well, when we get into sporadic management, the most important thing is to identify its behavior. So that X tells us, hey, it's sporadic in nature. How are we going to manage it, right? So the next thing that we're going to be doing in here is we're also going to be coming out and we're going to say, okay, we should probably manage it a little bit different. So how does StockIQ approach the management of one of these sporadic items? Well, when we begin thinking about a sporadic item, we're going to go back over here to our order policy settings, and we're going to talk about the various order policies. So Business Central provides you with some nice ordering. There's 3 or 4 different ways you can order product. However, one of them that's not there is sporadic sales. Well, what does a sporadic sale mean? Sporadic sale essentially is saying that with the sporadic sale, what we're going to do is we're going to carry so much on the shelf, meaning I know those orders come in and they might be really, really big, let's determine what that average or typical order size would be. So if we were to go back out there and look at that stratification, and I looked at this item again, we're going to look at all those sales that occur in there, and we're going to say, what's the typical order size? We can see we have a really big one out in here, but the typical order size looks like it's around a peak of around 48. So when they're ordering in quantities of 48. Well, we can make a decision. Do we want to, if we're coming back over here to our order policy settings, do we want to use a sporadic order sales policy and basically carry that typical order size? So first and foremost, that's what the XYZ does. One, it identifies how it behaves, but more importantly, it helps us understand how we're going to generate the replenishment on it. Okay, let's see here. I think we might have time for one more question out in here. So let's talk about that next question that came in. So the next question came in was, hey, how can you lower inventory with all of these different things that are going out there? And you talked about a 10 to 30% savings. How do you accomplish that? So how StockIQ accomplishes that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare that to typically how we see people managing inventory. When we typically see people managing inventory, we're typically seeing them, one, manually set what their safety stock is or how much they're going to be carrying. Oftentimes, it's a lead time's worth of inventory. So let's actually pick on an item out in here that might have a little bit longer lead time. Here's an item with, that's not a great item. Here's an item out in here. Let's see if we can find it. Here's a 15-day. Boy, I'm striking out here. Okay, a little bit better here. Okay, here's an item with a 16-day lead time on it. Okay, but you can also look at our forecast on there, and our forecast is actually pretty doggone low, forecast error on it. So in this particular case, in lieu of carrying 16 days of inventory, we're basically saying, hey, on average, you can carry 8 and still meet a 99% service level goal. So how we accomplish these savings is by looking at each and every one of these individual items and looking at what your goal and objective is and objectively setting that for each and every one. So not every item is going to have 8 days of inventory on it. A lot of them will have 3, some of them may be more than what you would carry from a lead time perspective. So that's how we accomplish it, by looking at every single one of these. So with that being said, thank you for your time today. Thank you for attending this webinar. I would be happy to visit with you directly. As I mentioned out in here, if you do schedule with us, talk about leveling up Business Central, we're happy to send you a $50 Amazon gift card. So with that being said, thank you so very much. Look forward to hearing, appreciate your questions and your time. Sorry that I wasn't able to get to more of the questions that are out there.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for the presentation. And for anyone on today's webinar, or if you're watching on demand, we thank you for taking the time out to join us. If anybody has any additional questions, please reach out to your customer success manager here at Innovia, and we'll get you in touch with Jeffrey at StockIQ. Also, check out our website for more of our upcoming events, and that's innovia.com/events. We also have our training workshop page at innovia.com/workshops. We have a variety of workshops to fit your role, so check out the ones that are right for you and your team. And if you have not heard the latest Innovia Conversation podcast, we have a library of podcast episodes for you to listen to, and you can learn more on our podcast page at innovia.com/podcast. Browse through our selection and subscribe so you'll get notified when those new episodes air. All right, once again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Jeffrey, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another Innovia webinar. Take care, everyone.